Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Today, I got a college football video talking about, in my opinion, the top 15 quarterbacks in next season in college football. This is very difficult. At first, I was only going to do a top 10, but I'm like, damn, there's a lot of really good quarterbacks that I want to talk about. So I made it 15, and it's going to be separated here into tiers. So the first tier I'm going to talk about are some really good college quarterbacks who I think could have good seasons, but for one reason or another, I don't really think that they're going to be, pushing for a Heisman or anything like that. The second tier are guys who I think are going to be Heisman dark horses, meaning that I think I could see some things lining up where they could end up being in that conversation by the end of the year. But I really don't think any of those guys are going to end up winning the Heisman. And then the final tier are going to be guys that I actually think are the contenders, the real favorites to win the Heisman. And I'd be shocked if it's not one of those guys, if it is a quarterback, that end up winning the Heisman. Those are the real best quarterbacks in college football, in my opinion. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Thank you for watching. And yeah, here we go. All right. Starting off at number 15, I got Grayson McCall. He is formerly Coastal Carolina, spent about 4 years there, I believe, and recently transferred to NC State in the AAC, or sorry, ACC. And let's talk about Grayson McCall. So what he has at NC State is going to be a very good run game there because not only he himself, he got Jordan Waters coming in from Duke. Kevin Conception as a true freshman was a monster both through the air and on the ground. So I think it's going to be a very good run game at NC State. It's a very workable schedule. People talk about them as having like the easiest path, if you will, to the ACC championship. He's coming off a injured season, so I don't know how that's going to affect his mobility. Early in his career, he was a very mobile quarterback, so we'll see if, like I said, he brings that with him to NC State. Um, does not turn the ball over hardly at all in what he's shown in his career at Coastal Carolina. But here's some things I'm worried about. Obviously, the injury concerns coming off of last season, the lack of depth at NC State. There are a lot of guys there that have not been proven in other places or even there themselves. So if there are going to be several weapons for McCall at NC State, they're going to have to kind of come out of nowhere, if you get what I'm saying. And they don't have that many big nationally televised games against good opponents because obviously, in order to win the Heisman, you have to have these Heisman moments. As I'm going to talk about later in this video, Grayson McCall, because of their schedule, is not going to have as many opportunities to kind of prove himself against high level competition. But with that being said, he's still going from a G5 team to a Power Four team, and I do think he's going to look pretty good. Like I mentioned, Jordan Waters, Kevin Conception, the two guys I think that are going to really help him on offense. Looking at what he did at NC State at Coastal Carolina, and what I think he could do at NC State. So 2020, 2021, 2022, those are his healthy years at Coastal Carolina. Didn't play that often, but as you can see, the touchdown to interception ratio is really remarkable when you think about it. For a young quarterback, even if it is G5, I mean, the completion percentage, the touchdown interception ratio, all are incredibly impressive. Um, had at least 30 touchdowns as well in each of these years combined. Next season, though, I expect him to play more games than any year before if he stays healthy, of course. And I actually do think he's going to have his best season of his career statistically, even though he is taking that jump in competition from G5 to Power 4. That's why I think his interceptions and his turnovers will be the most of his career because of that jump in competition. But I do think Grayson McCall is going to be a very good quarterback next year. I think he's going to possibly even lead NC State to the ACC championship. My early prediction for that game might even be NC State and Miami if I had to give you one right now. But I think Grayson McCall is going to lead them to a 10-win season. And I think he's going to be a very good player. But again, due to a couple factors holding him back, I can't put him any higher than 15 on this list. Moving on, we got Cam Rising from Utah here. A lot of things to talk about for Cam Rising. For one, he's coming off a season where he missed the entire season. Did not play, I believe, to a ACL injury he suffered in 2022, I believe. So did not play at all last year. But here's some good things. He already has the storyline, right, of the comeback player. He won back-to-back Pac-12 championships when he was healthy. He's incredibly experienced. He's like 24 years old, I believe. And he does play some big games next year in the Big 12, obviously. Utah moving from the Pac 12 to the Big 12. And when he was healthy, he was a very mobile quarterback, was able to use his legs a lot. Here's the problems, though, that I have, not just with Cam Rising, but really Utah as a whole. So obviously Cam Rising coming off a season where he just didn't play football, we don't know how he's going to look next season. The lack of talent on Utah is very prevalent. I mean, we're going to talk about a bunch of teams on here. It's going to be pretty evident that I think Cam Rising, in terms of running backs, wide receivers, just has the least to work with, really. Um, these guys are not that good compared to everybody else on this list, and they're even if they are a good offense, I think it's going to come from being a run first team. Um, in part to Cam Rising. Here's some of the guys he has to work with. Now, Micah Bernard, their best running back on the team, I believe, but this wasn't even from last. He only played 2 games last year himself, so this is from 2022. His stats, it's solid. Nothing spectacular, but a respectable running back. Dorian Singer was not good last year for USC. He was one of, if not the best receivers in the entire Pac-12 in 2022. So obviously, if you're a Utah fan, you're hoping he can return to that form. But last year at USC, nothing to brag about. And Money Parks, half of his touchdowns and like a fourth of his yards came on like their first drive of the season. So Money Parks, he didn't have a great year last year, but their whole offense was abysmal last year. Let's take a look at Cam Rising though. What he was when he was healthy, he was very, very solid. Obviously, I already mentioned they won the Pac-12 back-to-back years with this guy as the starter, but it's not the Pac-12, it's the Big 12 now. You could make the argument that it's a lower caliber of defenses he's playing against, and I understand that. Like I said, he's going to have a couple opportunities in some big games. I believe they play Arizona, Kansas State, or sorry, Oklahoma, or Arizona, Oklahoma State, and Colorado. All 3 of those games I expect to be, a lot of eyes on them. And I think Utah could easily win the Big 12 championship. So I think Cam Rising will have a good season, very good season. That's why he's in this tier. But I don't think he has the weapons around him, the pieces, if you will, to put together a Heisman campaign or anything like that. So he comes in at 14 for me. Next up, I got Jalen Daniels. This is, this is very biased. I think I'm a massive Jalen Daniels fan. Kansas is one of my favorite teams, and I want Jalen Daniels to have a very good year, right? I think there's a lot of things in his favor, right? This is his most talented roster he's ever played for. His top 3 receivers all come back. His top 2 running backs come back. His coach obviously is still there. He's been at Kansas for years now. He's been in this offense for a long time. He is as prepared as he could possibly be. He is a dynamic athlete, uses his legs incredibly well. Kansas is going to be a team that can they're a dynamic offense and that they can beat opposing teams in multiple ways. And they have an extremely workable schedule. Don't be shocked at all if Kansas wins double-digit games in the regular season. Here's some things holding him back, though. Obviously, when you talk about Jalen Daniels, you just have to bring up the fact the man has hardly played any football the last 2 years. He has been incredibly hurt. He hasn't played a lot the last 2 years, but when he's out there, obviously the talent is undeniable, and the small school bias plays a part. Even if Kansas is like 9-2 going into the end of the regular season, they're not going to be given as much credit. For example, let's say like Notre Dame's 9-2, they're going to get the nod every time over Kansas. Like Clemson's 9-2. Obviously, it's just Kansas is going to have a stigma about them that these other teams don't have to worry about, and they don't really have that massive game on their schedule that everybody's going to be paying attention to, like some of these other teams as well. So a couple of things holding him back, but talk about the weapons he has. Devin Neal, one of the best running backs in the country, dominant force last year in the Big 12. Lawrence Arnold is the best receiver that returns, but they also have multiple others that return as well. Daniel Hishaw, backup running back, very explosive in limited action. The offense as a whole, it's just great. They got 5 guys on offense that I really consider to be like great weapons, like for Kansas. So I'm excited to see how he plays. Here's what it looks like, right? 2022, played 9 games, a lot of success, played very well, limited action. Went head to head with KJ Jefferson in Arkansas in that amazing bowl game. Last year, hardly played at all. Still had a very good completion percentage, touchdown interception ratio, all that, but he just hardly played, right? But even though he hardly played, Kansas still had their like what best season, and who knows when they went like 8 games or something like that, 8, 9 games. So next season, listen, it's almost impossible to predict him to play this many games. I mean, when I'm saying he's going to play more games next year than he has played the last 2 years combined, I understand that sounds a little unrealistic, but if he can do that, I absolutely think he's going to be a very exciting player to watch. I think he's going to have massive games, like statistically in terms of numbers and all that. Um, And because of the talent around him and the caliber of teams that they play against, I think he could really do some magical things next season and certainly have Heisman moments, even if they don't get as much attention necessarily as some of these other quarterbacks we're going to talk about. But all I want, man, regardless of how many games they win, how good he looks, I just want a healthy season from Jalen Daniels. That's all I care about for him. Next up, we got Quinn Ewers. This might be the one that shocks the most people. I'm just not that high on Quinn Ewers. And I think there's a lot of things that people fail to mention that really knock him down a couple tiers for me. Because keep in mind, this is not necessarily like this is not just talking about talent. Obviously, it's a big part of this, but this is sort of a prediction for how good I think these guys are going to do next season, right? I don't think Quinn Ewers is going to be this dominant force that everybody else thinks he will be. So let's talk about what is good about him first. Um, he's been in this team. This is his third year, right? This is his third year now at Texas. So he understands Steve Sarkisian's system. He knows everything he needs to know to be prepared when he goes out there. The talent around him is evident. I'm not saying they have a weak roster or anything like that. They have a lot of talented pieces. He already has, I'm sure if you had like a favorites or odds thing for Heisman, I'm sure he'd probably be in like the top 5 or 6 without a shadow of doubt. So he already has that narrative about him that here we go. Here's one of the Heisman favorites right here. And he does have multiple massive games where if he does play well in these games against Georgia and Michigan, it's going to be hard to knock him in terms of being a Heisman contender. Here's the problems that I have concerns with. So many new pieces at Texas. Let's talk about this. They lost their number one receiver, their number two receiver, their number three receiver, their number one tight end, and their number one running back. All 5 of those pieces are gone for Texas. All new guys coming in. Um, the top 2 running backs do return from last season. That's a good part. But Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, the guy from Houston, I believe, the Ryan Wingo, the freshman, like hit their top 4 receivers next year. The guy from Alabama, Black, their top 5 receivers potentially could all be new faces. So it's like you're asking this guy who is coming off like he's also missed some time. I didn't put the injury concerns on here. Quinn Ewers has missed a good amount of games the last 2 years. You're asking this guy to work all of these new receivers in one offseason. That's a lot of ask, in my opinion. Also not as mobile as some of these other guys on his list. He's kind of strictly a pocket passer. I feel like that limits guys. Like when you look at the history of the Heisman, most of these guys have been incredibly mobile and have been able to do things with their legs. And like I said, all the pressure the problem with Quinn Ewers is if he has one really bad game because of all the pressure that's put on him so early, like if he plays bad, like really bad against Michigan in week 2, they could just say fuck him and he doesn't even put his name back in that conversation regardless. So a lot of concerns I have for Quinn Ewers. Here's what he's looked like the last couple years. I'll be honest, man. Even though last season the team did very well, I wasn't all that impressed with Quinn. Don't get me wrong, he had a good year, a really solid year. But when I look at that season, nothing really, sticks out to me as, oh yeah, this guy is going to go from this to the Heisman in 2024. I think he'll have his best season. I think even though the level of competition in the SEC is going to take a big jump, that's why I think he's going to turn it over the most at any time in his career. But like even statistically, I just like these numbers right here. The only way, the only path I see for Quinn Ewers to win the Heisman is literally if Texas goes undefeated, which is it's just going to be so difficult to do. You got to beat Michigan in week 2 on the road. You got to beat Georgia. I'm sure they got to beat Oklahoma. Like there's a lot of tough games for Texas. Not that many out. They don't have the hardest schedule in the SEC. Texas A&M, I think they play. So you're going to have to literally go undefeated and probably throw for 4,000 yards at least in 12 games. So it's going to be extremely difficult, but not impossible. But I'd give it like a 1% chance or less for Quinn Ewers next year. But I do think he'll have his best year and probably go in the first round. Next up, I got that. Now this is the second tier. These are guys from this point forward that I think really have a shot to win the Heisman, and I'll explain why. Brady Cook right here. If we're talking about SEC as the best conference in the country, which I think we all can agree on, and the most attention on all these games, Missouri and Brady Cook have the easiest schedule out of any of the top 5 teams. And the top 5, contrary to popular belief, does not include Alabama, not include LSU, does not include Oklahoma, does not include Tennessee. It's Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas, Missouri. I was wrong. It was a top 4. It was a top 4, not a top 5. Those 4 are the top 4 teams, and Missouri has the easiest schedule by far. Their toughest game is Alabama. Um, Brady Cook has the best wide receiver. in college football, debatably, along with like McMillan at Arizona. They have an amazing run game, even though they lost Cody Schrader. They bring in multiple guys. They should have a great run game next season. They're under the radar. Those four teams I just mentioned, Missouri by far is getting the least amount of hype of all those teams. So he doesn't have the same expectations upon him as a Quinn Ewers. Their first 7 games, they should start out 7-0. And if they start out 7-0 and Brady Cook plays well, he's absolutely going to be in that conversation. And guess what their 8th game is? Alabama. So that game could end up being massive because a lot of eyes are going to be on how good is Brady Cook, how good do they look against Alabama. And if they win that game, it's off to the races, in my opinion. The difference or the negatives here, a low profile. Most people don't know about Brady Cook right now. He's starting off at a very low point in terms of the Heisman race. They only have one major game. Like I said, that Alabama game, everything in terms of Heisman talk and national recognition for Missouri rides on how they play in that game. Um, and Luther Burden hype. The problem I could foresee, let's see, Brady Cook has a really good year, but Luther Burden has a great year. I'm afraid that they're going to give him, like, he's going to get more Heisman attention than Brady Cook because he already has the national acclaim as best receiver in the country. So Brady Cook could have a great year, and they might just say, well, yeah, but Luther Burden is the best player on this team. Let's give him the nod for Heisman. I wouldn't be mad at that, but I'm just saying that's a risk we're running here. I already mentioned Luther Burden, one of the best receivers in the country, monster in the SEC already. Theo Weiss, a very good wide receiver too. He returns a lot of experience, not just at Missouri, but also Oklahoma. And Marcus Carroll, he is the big transfer addition in order to replace Cody Schrader. He comes in from Georgia State. They also got the App State running back as well, so they got multiple guys in there. But Marcus Carroll had a monster season last year. So it's a great roster. I'll be honest. It's a great team. I expect Missouri to win at least 11 games in the regular season. So I think it's going to be a great team. And I think Brady Cook is going to have a great year. Problem is, I even with I think even if he does have this season that I predicted, right? I don't know if that's enough. He's not a dominant quarterback, right? I don't think he's gonna blow people away statistically, which at the end of the day, you gotta have those 400-yard games. You gotta have those 5, 6 touchdown games if you want to be in the Heisman conversation. I just don't know if Brady Cook is capable of that, but I do think he's going to have a very, very good season next year and shock a lot of people for certain. So Brady Cook, the first guy in this dark horse tier. Moving on, we have Caden Salter from Liberty. Now, G5 school, not a lot of attention whatsoever, but Caden Salter might be the best running quarterback next season. He already had over 1,000 yards last season on the ground. He is extremely dominant with his legs. Um, and here's the thing: Liberty, they went 13-0 last season. They're probably going to do that again. They lost to Oregon, obviously, but I expect Liberty to go undefeated. Like, I don't think, even though they lost their number one receiver, stuff like that, I don't expect them to fall off. They were the best run team in the country last year. Okay. I think they should be again. Honestly, I don't see any reason why not. They still got their head coach, still got Caden Salter, still have their number one running back. Look at the stats last season. Quentin Cooley, a monster last year. The difficulty being that I don't expect him to be able to move the ball, and that's Caden Salter, through the air like he did last season. They lost their number one receiver. Um, they're a run first team, and I expect that to be the same. And again, even if they do go undefeated, it's Liberty, it's Conference USA. Not that many people are going to give them that much attention. But I think he's going to have a lot of highlight plays. He's very explosive, very exciting. But biggest thing holding him back is the team that he plays for. Here's what he did last year, right? Close to 4,000 yards and 44 touchdowns. It was incredible. It was an amazing statistical season, but he didn't get any credit for it. So can he replicate that? Honestly, I think it's going to be difficult. It's going to be really difficult, but I do think he can crack that 40 touchdown mark again. I think getting a year of experience may limit his turnovers and stuff like that. He just doesn't have the quality of weapons in the pass game as some of these other teams do. But listen, he's amazing as a runner of the football. They're going to be running for like 300 yards a game, right? Um, I just don't think he's going to be able to do enough through the air to compare to some of these other guys that are going to throw for like 4,000 yards, right? So it's just tough to catch up to them from that perspective. But I think he could be a real dark horse if they go undefeated again and he puts up 40 plus touchdowns. People are going to be talking about, well, Caden Salter, 2 years in a row now, he's been dominant in the regular season. So keep an eye on him. All right, my bad. I had to go back and edit this shit real quick. I forgot to talk about my boy. All right, next up, we got Seth Hennigan, or sorry, Hennigan. Sorry. Think about this kind of as like the better version of Caden Salter. What I mean by that, they're both G5 quarterbacks. But I feel like Seth Hennigan plays in a more competitive conference, the AAC. He plays for Memphis, of course, and I feel like he is not more well known than Salter, but I feel like his style, his play style, he's more of a drop back pocket passer, and I think it's more suitable. It's more Heisman friendly, if I'm going to put it that way. Um, some things I like about Seth Hennigan. He returns his top two receivers. He's been playing for Memphis for a long time, and I think they could be a really, really good team. So can Liberty. Honestly, I feel like I'm almost certain that either Seth Hennigan or Caden Salter will be playing in the college football playoff because I think, honestly, Memphis and Liberty are going to be the two best G5 teams. I think one of them is going to go or I think both of them could win their conference, but I think at least one of them is going to go undefeated. And if that's the case, they're probably going to be top 10 teams in the college football playoff, right? They get an automatic bid. So I think they're going to both get national attention for that. But of course, the things holding back G5 school, like a competition, not a well known name. Obviously, the things that come for playing with a small school like Memphis. In terms of his receivers that return, Rock Taylor, Demir Blankumsey, top two receivers both come back. They combined for over 2,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. That is a massive um, that's a great thing. That's a great thing for Seth Hennigan to get his top two receivers returning. They lose Blake Watson to the NFL. He was a great running back from Memphis, but they bring in Mario Anderson from South Carolina. Keep in mind, South Carolina and their terrible offensive line. Mario Anderson managed to have over 800 total yards at South Carolina in his first season there. So I really like that acquisition. I think he'll be a very good running back next season for Memphis. I think honestly, I think it's going to be a dominant offense. And I say dominant, like seriously. Like I think Memphis could be one of the best point scoring offense in the country next season. Let's take a look at Seth Hennigan specifically and what he has done so well in his career. Let me make sure I go back here. So he's, like I said, years of experience at Memphis, and years of big numbers. I mean, he's 3,000 yards every single season, at least. Last season was his best, broke the 30 touchdown mark, had over 4,000 yards from scrimmage. It was amazing, close to 40 total touchdowns. I do expect him to take yet another jump forward. I think they're going to be playing in the AAC championship. I think they could absolutely make the playoff. If not, they'll be in a high level bowl game. I think he could come close to that 5,000 yard mark from scrimmage. I think he'll certainly will pass 40 touchdowns from scrimmage. He's going to be a guy that puts up massive numbers, but it's the the old argument, lower level of competition even though you are statistically superior to some of these guys I'm going to have above him, some people are going to not give him that credit. And I understand that point of view, but without a shadow of a doubt, I think Seth Hennigan is going to be one of the most productive players in the country next season at the quarterback position. And he's going to absolutely blow some people away with the numbers he puts up like that. I am certain about that. So I got Seth Hennigan at 9 as a Heisman dark horse. Next up, I got Jalen Milrow. Jalen Milrow gets so much hate. It is ridiculous. And, I talked about Cam Rising having the worst weapons here. Jalen Milrow we think Alabama, right? This guy has the cream of the crop to throw to and hand off to. That's not the case at all, man. Alabama has the worst receiving core in the SEC, possibly. No good running backs. It's ridiculous. That's a whole rant in and of itself. But the amount of pressure that Jalen Milrow has on him, right, as really with the saving grace. If Alabama didn't have Jalen Milrow and they had just an average quarterback, we'd be talking about them as like a 7-win team. But because they have Jalen Milrow, they got to win 10 games. You got to make the playoff. It's ridiculous, man. But some things I like about Jalen Milrow, he's incredibly explosive as a runner of the football, can make people miss. Massive, big play guy with his legs. A great deep ball on him. You can make a 5-minute compilation of Jalen Milrow just throwing bombs last season accurately and with perfect timing. The offensive coaching, they had like the old, who was it? Was it like Tommy Reese was the old OC there? Horrible. They were supposed to have Ryan Grubb from Washington. He came to my Seahawks in the NFL. He still got Kalen DeVore, though. I expect a increase in offensive coaching there at Alabama. But another good thing is all the weight on his shoulders, several massive games. This guy, if Alabama is good, he is going to get all the credit, which he deserves. I mean, absolutely. If this offense is somehow good next season, it will be 100% because of Jalen Milrow. And, he deserves that credit if they are good. But the bad part is they're The bad part is I find it very difficult that they're going to be good. They have a bad O line. He got sacked 100 times last year. They don't have any receivers on the fucking roster that are going to go in the first or second round of the draft next year. They didn't have any that went in the first or second round like last year. Their best receiver was like the number 100 overall pick in the draft last year. Too much pressure on his shoulders. If he has a bad game, they're going to crucify him for it. And it's a rebuild year. Alabama right now is simply not a talented enough roster offensively to produce a Heisman level quarterback. With that being said, I think Jalen Milroe is so talented that he could rise above that. But I mean, just look at their weapons, man. This is the thing. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say to you. The best weapon on Alabama's roster was Washington University's wide receiver four. Think about that for a second. Imagine that. Alabama, wide receiver you, running back you, had to go get Washington's number four receiver to be their number one weapon on their entire team. That's embarrassing. That is a joke and a massive failure by Alabama to recruit guys. They have not had a dominant receiver for years now. Even Bryce Young's last year, it's been like 3 years since they've had an actual talented wide receiver. It's ridiculous. Their running backs are no longer that good, man, since like Brian Robinson and them. So, or Jameer Gibbs, I should say. Like it's embarrassing how badly Alabama has recruited wide receiver and running back talent the last couple of years, and they're left with nothing as a result. Jalen Milroe has to work with scraps compared to these other guys. Here's what I think though. Next season, I do expect him to look better just simply because of the difference in coaching now. An offensive minded guy like Kalen DeBoer, I think he will put up close to 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. In spite, absolutely in spite of the talent around him. And he'll probably get no credit for it, to be honest. If he puts up this stat line and Alabama wins 9 games, people are going to call it disappointing. That blows my mind. The hate people have for this guy when all he does is succeed in spite of the talent around. It's ridiculous to me. Jalen Milroe is one of my favorite players simply because he gets hated on so much for no reason. We saw you guys forget the USF game. How or yeah, was it USF? I don't even remember that fucking yeah. I think it was USF. How fucking terrible Alabama looked against a G5 team without Jalen Milroe. And with Jalen Milroe, they were, I don't know, they were beating Georgia, going neck to neck with Michigan, beating Tennessee, beating all these other teams, but beating Ole Miss. But without Jalen Milroe, they struggled to beat USF. Like it blows my mind that, whatever, bro. I'm ranting too much. Jalen Milroe, in spite of the lack of talent around him, I think he's going to have a very good season next year. Moving on. Number 7, I got Riley Leonard here. Recently of Duke, transferred to Notre Dame, and it's gonna be like, it's gonna be like a homeless guy walking into, Walmart and just, in terms of the amount of talent he has now. And don't get me wrong, Duke had some good players on last year, but nothing compared to what he's gonna have access to now at Notre Dame. It's got a much better offensive line. He's gonna have a good amount of receivers to throw to, improve running, all that. He also has the offensive coordinator now from LSU that just coached Jalen Daniels into his Heisman season, is now going to be working with Riley Leonard with a similar skill set, if we're being honest, and trying to get the best out of him. I like that a lot. And also, Notre Dame's schedule is laughable. Yeah, I would not be shocked at all if Notre Dame went undefeated next season. So we have all these things work in his favor. Unfortunately, he's coming off a major injury that he struggled to deal with last season. He may lose some mobility as a result of that. And the con to having an easy schedule, you don't have many big games to have Heisman moments on. So all those things working in and against him. His top weapon is Chris Mitchell. I forget where he comes from. I think it's like FIU or something like that. He comes in, amazing season. I forget where he played, honestly, but he had an amazing season last year, well over 1,100 yards. He should be their number one receiver. Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Thomas, there were a couple young guys. Greathouse was a freshman, Thomas was a sophomore. These are guys who you expect with a new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, to take massive leaps in production. So I think he has a really good wide receiver core, to be honest with you. Mitchell Evans, I didn't include him here. Mitchell Evans, the tight end, one of, if not the best tight ends in the country. So the pantry, if you will, of receivers to throw to, there he had plenty of them. Okay, that's not going to be a concern here. Let's take a look closer at what he was. Obviously, the 2022 year was his best year. I mean, pretty much 3,700 yards, 33 touchdowns. Didn't turn it over all that much. Last season, very disappointing. Dealt with injuries. So next season, I do expect him to have his best year statistically. But I think it's going to be difficult for I don't know how many years of eligibility he has left. I'd like to see him spend multiple years in Notre Dame, to be honest with you, because I think next year could be a really, really good year for him. But I think his first year in Notre Dame, I don't think he's going to be able to take that big of a jump because I don't think he is that much of a refined thrower of the football. I think he kind of relies on his his brute force in terms of his athleticism, his legs. He's a very mobile guy, but I think he has a lot to learn still. And while I think he could have a great year next year, he's a dark horse Heisman. I don't know if we've seen the full potential of Riley Leonard yet. So I'm curious to see if he does end up staying multiple years at Notre Dame. Moving on. Now this is the tier, guys, where any of these guys, I could genuinely see them winning the Heisman. First up, we got Noah Fafita at Arizona. And if you don't know about him, a lot of people have been starting to know him because they went on like a 7-8 game win streak at the end of last season, and he played amazing. They beat Oklahoma in their bowl game. He's a great thrower of the football. A lot of big plays happen at Arizona. He has an amazing receiver, Territory McMillan, arguably the best in the entire country. And they have a lot. They have a few big games. They have a few really big games they play. I think they play Kansas, Utah, and Colorado. All those games should be absolute, must watch, must see TV. I love their run game that they should have next season at Arizona, and the defenses they're going to be playing. I just told you, fucking Kansas and Colorado are two of their best games. So he should be able to carve up some of these Big 12 defenses next season. The problem for me, lack of depth. Outside of McMillan, I don't know how many receivers on that team I really love. Um, he has not shown to be a great runner of the football himself, so he might be a little limited there as strictly a pocket passer. Not that experienced. He doesn't have as much, in game action as some of the other guys on this list, and they also have a new head coach coming in from where was it? Was it Fresno State or San Diego State? One of those two. So a few things working against him here, but just take a look at the guys he has to play with here. Territory McMillan, obviously, over 1,400 yards last season, 90 catches. He threw a touchdown pass, 10 touchdowns. He had an amazing year last season. Quali Conley, where is he coming from? I believe he comes in from San Diego State, if I'm not, or San Jose State, maybe. He had a great year last season, over 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns, and a very few amount of touches, by the way. And you also get Ja'Cory Merritt. Where does he come from? I think he comes from New Mexico State. They got a couple of G5 running backs transferring in who both themselves were amazing last year at the G5 level. Ja'Cory Merritt, 18 touchdowns, almost 1,200 yards, or over 1,200 yards. So I love the running back duo off out the gate. On top of that, add in Territory McMillan. Arizona should be an incredibly explosive offense. Taking a look at him, obviously only has one season under his belt, but in that one season, he was incredibly impressive as a thrower of the football. So the sky is the limit. I expect him to take a massive jump next season because keep in mind, he didn't even start last season as the starter. He took over after several games from Jaden Delora, and he was amazing. So with going into next season as the starter, I think we're going to see an absolutely massive jump in performance and production. So I do expect him to dominate the Big 12, and I'm not sure if I would pick him to be the Heisman next season, but 2 years from now, 3 years from now, well, maybe not 3 years, but down the line, I definitely think this is a guy who is going to be a great player at Arizona. I think next season is going to be the first year that we really see what he could be, at the college level. Next up, number 5, I got Jackson Dart here from Ole Miss. Again, I talked about that Big Four in the SEC. All four of those guys are going to be on my the quarterbacks of all four of those teams are going to be on my list here. And I think Jackson Dart, the biggest thing for Jackson Dart, right, is the experience and the amount of weapons he has at his disposal. This is his third year now at Ole Miss. He is able to use both his arm and his legs. And Ole Miss should start next season out at 6-0. If they do, very similar to Brady Cook, where both these teams could be undefeated in the first half of the season, and they both should be getting a lot of attention as the quarterbacks of these undefeated top 5, top 6 teams. The problem here for Jackson Dart is I believe his entire season is going to hang on the fact of whether or not they beat Georgia, right? That is the biggest game they play without a shadow of a doubt. If they win that game, he might be the favorite. If they lose that game, I just don't know how you're gonna be able to because they don't play another game on that caliber. So so much is going to be riding and depending on that game where you have to play flawless, basically. But I've talked about Ole Miss already on this channel. I'll just go through it again. Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, Juice Wells, one of the best wide receiver cores in the entire country. Absolutely incredible. Juice Wells, those stats are from 2022. He did not play last season or hardly played last season due to injury. Rashard Amos, they have so many. I could have done three receivers, four receivers, and four running backs here. I picked Rashad Amos. He comes in from Miami of Ohio, had a great season there. So they have a plethora of running backs. But the thing is, they lost Quinshon Judkins, right? And it could be a blessing in disguise for Jackson Dart because Judkins got a lot of touches last season where he didn't do a whole lot. He made a lot of explosive plays, but I feel like Judkins was kind of getting force fed a little bit at Ole Miss. Now I think they're going to have a much more balanced look. They're going to expect a lot more out of Jackson Dart. And I think as a result, he's going to put together his best season of his career. Let's take a look at it here. I think he could easily break the 4,000 yard as a passer, over 500 rushing yards as well. I think he could certainly be pushing 40 touchdowns. I think 39 is what I put. That's a little conservative there. Um, but yeah, man, if they can beat Georgia, they could certainly make the SEC championship game. I think they're going to make the playoffs. And man, it's just these SEC quarterback, the margins are so thin. It's going to come down to these head-to-head matchups. You know, Georgia, Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama. A lot of these guys are going to end up playing each other. You know, Utah and Arizona. You know, Fafita, Cam Rising, Fafita and Jalen. A lot of these guys are going to end up playing each other. So I think those head-to-head matchups are going to be massive in determining who ends up winning the Heisman. Next up, we got Shedeur Sanders. Everybody already knows about Shedeur Sanders, what he does well. Doesn't really do anything bad. I mean, he was for the hate that he gets, right? It's not about his play; it's about his personality. I don't really know how you can hate on Shedeur Sanders. He was just great last year, objectively. And the things that really stick out are how accurate he is with the football, um, the moments how he plays in big games as well, and the talent around him. Their receiver core is fucking ridiculous. It's a ridiculous receiver core. It's one of the best in the country, undeniably. Um, and of course, he already has the hype, right, and the notoriety. So I'll put it like this: Shedeur Sanders, if he has a game where he has like 300 yards and three touchdowns, that is going to be taken more seriously and with have more attention than a guy like, let's say, Seth Hennigan has 400 yards and four touchdowns. People are going to talk about Shedeur Sanders' game more than they're going to talk about Seth Hennigan, even though he had a better game. So that's what I'm saying is a positive for Shedeur Sanders is that he already has such a big name that what he's going to do is going to be magnified. What's not great for him is that Colorado, even though they made massive upgrades, is still not going to have a great offensive line. They're not going to have a good run game. They were like the worst in the country last year. They were bad defensively. And with all those things taken into consideration, I only think that they have like an 8 or a 9 win ceiling. So can you really see a Heisman on a team that only wins 8 or 9 games? I'm not sure. With that being said, like I already talked about the receivers. Will Shepard comes in from Vanderbilt, great player on a not good team. Jimmy Horn last season, a lot of big time plays, a lot of big time moments. He already has a connection with Shedeur. Travis Hunter, one of the most talented players in the country, great receiver last year, even though he missed time. Arguably the most talented player on the whole team. LeJounte Webster comes in. Where does he come from? Is it cent or he might be FIU actually. The other guy might have been wrong about, but FI or LeJounte Webster played for like the Owls. I think that is FIU. Over 1,200 total yards last season. 1,200, 9 touchdowns. LeJounte Webster, massive, massive acquisition for Colorado. So the weapons at wide receiver are not a concern, right? The talent of Shedeur is not a concern. It's everybody else around him. Last season, broke 3,000 yards, 3,200 yards, only 11 games, by the way, 69 completion percentage, an amazing touchdown interception ratio, and got sacked so many times, negative 77 rushing yards. I do expect him to push 4,000 total yards and 40 touchdowns. And if he does that, he's going to get a fuck ton of national recognition and hype. They play, I believe they play Kansas, Arizona, and Utah. So those are three of the biggest games. I think they also play Kansas State. Maybe I'm wrong about one of those games. They play at least three out of the four: Kansas State, Utah, Kansas, and Arizona. So those are some massive games, the big dogs in the Big 12, if you will. So if they can pull an upset or two out of that, we might be talking about Shedeur as a serious contender for the Heisman. Up next, we got Cam Ward out of Miami. Honestly, if I had to pick right now, my number one is my pick for the Heisman, but Cam Ward is my dark horse, I think. Even though he is getting some hype, but for my personal opinion, I feel like I'm way higher on Cam Ward than some other people are. He would be my dark horse pick. If it's not the number one guy I have, I think it'll be Cam Ward. Um, the upgrade in talent from what he had at Washington State and now at Miami, and don't get me wrong, he had some good receivers there, but I'm talking overall, the offensive line, the running backs, it's not even comparable, man. The roster is better, the offense is better, the coaching is better. And he himself has shown to take leaps forward from year one to year two to now hopefully year three in Miami. He has shown himself taking those steps to be a better quarterback. And again, honestly, you look at Washington State's schedule last year, the teams they had to play. Next year's schedule in the ACC, it's not going to be that hard. It's going to be easier than what he had to deal with last year in the Pac-12. So, and in terms of Miami's schedule specifically, it's an easy schedule. It's not that many good teams they play. He's going to be able to really beat up and put up some monster numbers on some bad teams next year. Problem is, not that many big games. Week one against Florida will be a big, one of their biggest games. It's Florida, but at least it's going to have some national attention. Uh, Cristobal is his head coach. The problem with that is Cristobal is liable to make some massive fucking mistake that just loses Miami a game that they should win. Think of Georgia Tech last year. And ACC, compared to the SEC, compared to the Big Ten, compared to the Big 12, I think the ACC is going to be the least respected Power Four conference next year, and Cam Ward may suffer as a result of that. But let's talk about some of the guys he has at his disposal here. Damian Martinez comes in, arguably the best running back in the entire Pac-12 last year, over 1,300 total yards, averaged like over 6 yards a carry, 9 touchdowns. He's a monster. Xavier Restrepo, 1,000-yard receiver last season at Miami. He's already established. Probably could have gone to the NFL last year if he wanted to, but he returns. He's going to be their number one receiver. Jacoby George had a couple massive games. He had almost 900 yards and 9 touchdowns last season. So like I said, the amount of options he has now at his disposal, nothing like he had at Washington State prior. And let's look at what he did. Right, 2022, his first year in Washington State, a very good entry point. Put himself on the scene. Year two, even though he played less games in 2023 than he did in 2022, he got much better statistically, more passing yards, better completion percentage, more touchdowns, less picks, more rush across the board. He took improvements, he made improvements everywhere. Why should I not assume that he'll do that again with all this talent around him, easier schedule, better coaching? I think it's very reasonable to expect him to do that again. So I think he could easily lead the country in passing yards. Without a shadow of a doubt, I think that's very possible for him. Break the 4,000-yard mark and then some. I think he could absolutely play in the ACC championship game, may even win that game. Over 30 touchdowns. He could absolutely break 40. I mean, I expect this to be his best season. He's already had two good seasons. So Cam Ward is my dark horse pick, one of my favorites to have just the best seasons overall in college football, but to be the most spectacular quarterback that we see next year. Number two, I have Carson Beck. Carson Beck, it's kind of the easiest pick here, really. I mean, he led the country in passing yards last season, I believe, at Georgia. Um, at Georgia, obviously, every game that they play is under a microscope. They do play Texas, they play Ole Miss, they play Tennessee, right? So they're going to have that national spotlight on every other game. The Georgia roster, it's amazing. And he himself, he's been in the system for so long that I expect next season he's going to be able to coast, or he's going to be able to coast to a good season, and make the first round of the NFL draft, and they're probably going to win at least 11 games in the regular season, 12 games overall, and just be a great team yet again. A couple of things to take note of. I don't think Georgia has a number one receiver. Now that Brock Bowers is gone, Ladd McConkey is gone, other guys are going to really have to step up, and I think they will. But as of right now, compared to some of these other teams, Georgia does not have, comparable talent right now at receiver. He is a more of a statue in the pocket, does not use his legs as much as some of these other guys that we've talked about. And obviously the expectations that come with being a Georgia quarterback, if they lose to Texas and Carson Beck doesn't play as well, he's probably right there. That's probably all it takes to bump him out of the Heisman talk right there. So a couple concerning things there. Their best players on offense, Trevor Etienne, the transfer from Florida, had a very, very good season. Their best running back they've had probably in a few years. Dominic Lovett is the guy right now that had the best season last year of any receiver. Probably gonna he might break the 1,000-yard mark next season. We'll have to wait and see about that. Ra Thomas also came in from Mississippi State. Not that great of a year one, but I do think he could take some strides forward and be a much better receiver in year two with Georgia. So they have enough, I think, for Carson Beck to put together a monster season. Here's what I'm looking at right here. I do think they'll play 15 games. I think Georgia will make the national championship game. So these stats might be a little skewed because of those extra games, but I think it'll absolutely break the 4,000-yard mark, well over 30 touchdowns in total. But I don't know. I don't really view Carson Beck because keep in mind there are going to be a lot of games where he doesn't play the fourth quarter, majority of the third quarter. So he might not be the most impressive statistically, even though he did lead the country in passing yards last season. He could do that next season in terms of total yards at the end of the year, but I don't know. I just don't view Carson Beck as this exciting, awe-inspiring, jaw-dropping. I just don't think he's going to have as many of those moments and performances as some of the other guys on this list. But without a shadow of a doubt, he might be the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman next year. I'm not discrediting that or doubting that, but I'm not as high on him as some other people are. But I do acknowledge and respect his talent. But at number one, the guy who I absolutely think is going to win the Heisman next year, Dylan Gabriel at Oregon. So many things working in his favor, right? He's the most experienced quarterback ever. If he's healthy next season, he is going to break Bo Nix's record for the most games played in college football history. Oregon has the last 2 years in a row, Oregon has given up the least amount of sacks in the entire country. That's what Dylan Gabriel gets to play behind next season. They have so many talented players at receiver, tight end, running back. They're just absolutely loaded on offense. Their path to the Big Ten championship is not hard at all. Their only difficult game is Ohio State. I expect them to absolutely destroy Michigan. I don't even think that'll be a game. Their only tough game is Ohio State. And also, he is able to use his legs. He will put up numbers both in the air and through the ground, or on the ground through the air, and he does not turn the ball over that much. So basically everything. He checks all the boxes, in my opinion. The only difficult parts is not enough big games, but that doesn't really matter because they play Ohio State. So if you play well in the Ohio State game, that's really all you need. Like if you play a game of that magnitude, it's the same for Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. Like if you play well against Georgia, that's all you need, right? Um, I think Oregon might be so good and so dominant offensively, they may win too easily. He may end up not playing in so many fourth and third quarters that it might actually hurt him statistically. And I also am kind of afraid that he kind of may be a little bit too much Bo Nix. And don't get me wrong, Bo Nix was amazing statistically the last few years, but I feel like he may just be more point guard than explosive play, deep ball, that type of thing. But I'm not really too worried about that. Some of their best players at Oregon, Jordan James, the running back, absolutely explosive, like 8 yards a carry, absolute monster, waiting in the wings. He will be amazing next season at the running back position. Evan Stewart, he comes in 5-star freshman of the year from Texas A&M, played 2 years there. He looks to take a massive jump forward at Oregon. Tez Johnson, almost 1,200 yards last season, 10 touchdowns. He was dominant already without Dylan Gabriel. I expect it to be the same with Dylan Gabriel. Just one of, if not the most talented rosters in the country at Oregon. And here's what he's been 2 years in a row, right, at Oklahoma. That's what he looked like, right? And that's without Lincoln Riley. That's without the guy that was making all these Oklahoma quarterbacks so good. He did this off his own talent. Last season, in only 12 games, right, he broke 4,000 yards. He broke 40 touchdowns. He only had 6 interceptions. He was a Heisman contender last year, and he only played 12 games. I think he'll play at least 14 next season, possibly 15, because I think they could easily make the college football playoff and win a game in the college football playoff. So I absolutely think Dylan Gabriel next season could be pushing 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns at Oregon. And if he's doing that, man, give him the Heisman. I don't see an argument playing in the two, one of the two biggest conferences. He's going to end up playing Ohio State. They're probably going to win every other game besides that. They might even win that game. And he's going to be absolutely amazing statistically. I mean, there's no argument that I can think of, real argument against Dylan Gabriel. So he is my number one quarterback in the country. He is my odds-on favorite to win the Heisman. And that concludes this video, y'all. So thank you so much for watching. It was a long video, absolutely a long video. I could have broke it up into 2 parts, but I didn't do that. I hope you have a good night or day. I don't know when you're watching this. It's night for me. It's like 3 a.m. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and peace.